Hello, ladies and gents. You see, today I wanted to go over some of this stuff because I figured not everyone's going to know about it, but I make a bigger case for it if I mention it here. I will have a live stream later today on some more comics from the Marvel Comics with some friends. That will be on around 11 to 12 a.m. Or, well, 12 would be p.m., but 11 to 12 specific Pacific Standard Time. And then for those on the Eastern Front, Eastern Standard Time, it'll be 3 to 4 p.m. So that's when you can expect that. But here we have the Once and Future Ben, the tale of Ben Quaneros Quadineros by The Revanchist by Marcel Ryan, a good friend. Anyway, if you remember, Bantam did this thing back in the 90s where we had Tales from Mos Espa, Mos Eisley's Cantina, Tales of the Bounty Hunters, and Tales from Jabba's Palace. And one thing that prequel fans were always upset about is we never got a Tales from for the prequels, like the Boonta Eve race, or the nightclub in episode 2 that Anakin and Obi-Wan walk in, or the space opera theater in episode 3. We always wanted those stories, but we never got them. So fans took it upon themselves to do their own. And it's a collected teamwork project. So far, there's only 3 stories up, but I thought I'd go through 2 or 3 of them today, depending on how I'm feeling, and just so people can experience that with me together. But make sure to actually go to the page and kudos it, which is just basically to like the story, so that way it gets more traction. Don't just listen to my reading, go check it out for yourself, or listen to my reading and just like it, just to be a good person. But yeah, we're gonna go through it together. So, starting with, we've got Once and Future Ben. Summary. After accepting a foolish bet, amateur Ben Quadineros signs up as a pod racing contestant in the Boonta Eve Classic. Before the race is about to begin, he starts to panic and realizes he is in way over his sizable head. He decides to take a walk and loses himself in the desert of Tatooine. In doing so, he makes a new friend and finds himself in the process. Part 1. The Bet. Checking everything. Why the long face, Quadineros? Ben Quadineros looked up at the newcomer, a scowl marking his expression. He recognized the man who addressed him as an old spacer he had met only days before at the spaceport. Quadineros was seated in his pod racer, a repulsor craft, built for the purposes of racing. By the majority of the galaxy, pod racing was considered to be a very fast-paced sport, but it was also very dangerous. Ben brought both of his hands up and began to massage his sizable forehead. Chesko, I don't even know where to begin. By the way, I don't remember what he sounds like, so I don't freaking know how to do his voice. So you make it up on it. You read it yourself. You get your own personal headcanon for that. The spacer looked slightly bemused, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. This wouldn't have anything to do with a certain bet I heard about. You know about that? Quadineros groaned and covered both of his eyes. Here he was, on the day of the Boonta Eve Classic, one of the greatest pod racing events this side of Malastare, and all he could think about was just how desperately he wished to be somewhere else. Anywhere else. Quadineros glumly thought back to the night before. The day had started out considerably better than it had ended. Newly arrived on Tatooine, Ben Quadineros could barely contain his excitement. He was eager to take in the local sights and immerse himself in the authentic Boonta Eve experience. He was no stranger to pod racing, but he was not here as a participant in the race, merely an enthusiastic spectator. After a few inquiries at the spaceport, Quadineros was told that the place to be that evening was the Poodoo Lounge, one of the most well-known venues in all of Mos Espa. He had it on good authority that famed pod racer Bull's Roar would be putting on a Glimmick concert that very night. Quadineros arrived at the lounge before Roar took the stage and ordered himself a jury juice. 1 became 2 as he waited for the music. 2 became 3. Soon enough, he felt a warm creeping into his not inconsiderable cheeks. When Bull's Roar finally took to the stage, Quaterneros was feeling the effects of the drink, and with it, a certain amount of liquid courage. Coincidentally, Roar brazenly declared to the crowd that his first song was about courage. He even went so far as to clarify that it was not dedicated to those spineless rejects who were mere spectators of the Boonta Eve. That was when Ben Quaterneros made it his first of several mistakes that evening. Haha, what a comedian! Quaterneros called out when Roar picked him out of the crowd and advanced on him. He immediately regretted opening his mouth. A comedian, am I? You wish I were joking? You big-headed toong? Roar growled, raising his fist. Huh? Quaterneros was completely caught off guard by this unexpected aggression. Put up both hands. I didn't mean any offense. No, of course not. Roar shot back. All toongs are too cowardly for pod racing. Am I butchering that? Tong? Is it tongs or toongs? I don't freaking know, man. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure. I'm probably quite a dummy on that one, but it's okay. Quaterneros felt the heat return to his cheeks. Even if this was the famous Bull's Roar, he refused to let that slight against his proud species stand. What? That's not true. I've raced in the Boofra circuit. The surrounding patrons of the Voodoo Lounge had been noticeably quiet up to this point, intent, as they were, on watching the confrontation unfold. At the mention of the Poofra circuit, several of them began to laugh and pound the tables. The Poofra? Roar Scout scoffed, pointing straight at Quaterneros, as if to say, "Look at this Cucho." A sneer painted across his bat-like face. Cuchu. I don't know the fudge that says. That's for inexperienced amateurs. I bet 5 million. I'm not going to pronounce that. You wouldn't dare enter the Boonta. Hayseed. I like these insults. They're quite fun. First he insults the tombs. Now he calls me a hayseed? Quaterneros thought, feeling the anger bubble over. In the hours following this moment, he would often think back and wonder if his reaction would have been different had he skipped out on the jury juice. Maybe he would have laughed it off and offered to buy Roar a drink. Maybe he would have simply walked away and endured the laughing that would have inevitably accompanied his retreat. Maybe. Instead of all that, he found himself saying, "I'm no hayseed. I'm Ben Quaterneros." He paused, letting his name echo on the crowd and onlookers. "And I'll take that bet." Roar chuckled and reached over to pat Quaterneros on the head. "Brave you may be, amateur, but if you want to enjoy your winnings, you'll have to survive the race." Taking up his instrument, Roar strummed out a discordant note. "I'm dedicating my first number to Ben Quaterneros. Get ready to crash. Get ready to burn." Pretty fun so far. I read this earlier because and I really enjoyed it. Quaterneros could still hear Bull's roar, last words ringing in his head, as the spacer brought him back to the present by rapping softly on his rented BT310 pod racer. "You still with me, Quaterneros?" When he saw the Toong look up at him, he continued, "Everyone on Mos Espa knows about that little bet you made." "What can I do about it? I'm trapped," Quaterneros wailed, covering his eyes once more. "Take it from an old navigator like me. Sometimes the best way is through. Good luck, Ben." Spacer winked at Quaterneros and patted his racer affectionately as he walked off to join the gathering crowd of early spectators, looking for good seats in Mos Espa's grand arena. Ben groaned at the Spacer's unhelpful advice. As he began to sink back into his thoughts, he was quickly pulled out again by the one of the two-headed Troig announcer voices piping through the overhead comm system. It sounded like Bede. "We're counting down the minutes till the Boonta Classic, with me as Fode, whose ears are still ringing from last night's Bull Roar concert." The other head Fode chimed in. "You told me to wear noise plugs, but did I listen?" Speaking of listening, I guess everyone's heard about Bull Roar's bet with Ben Quaterneros. Quaterneros grabbed his bulbous head yet again. What was I thinking? He asked a question out loud, turning to the pit droid servicing his pod racer. The Boonta is far more dangerous than any amateur race I've flown, but I stand to win 5 million. I can't from Pole's roar if I survive. One of the pit droids warbled an interrogative. Yeah, Adam. Lost in his own troubles, Quaternaros barely even noticed. He hoisted himself out of the pod racer and dropped to the ground of the hangar below. The pit chirped and twirled its fingers in a circle around the side of its head, in a near universal sign for, "This guy's lost his mind." Even the pit droids think I'm nutty, Quaternaros whined. I need a walk to clear my mind. With that, the stocky tongue exited the pod racer hangar and ambled off toward the busy streets of Mos Espa. Part 2. The Desert. Overall, I'm going to keep going. But, with the EU discontinued, and even if the EU gets continued, I'm almost positive we'll never get these tales sort of stories, that make experiencing those certain scenes in the film so fun. I mean, if you remember, every Expanded Universe fan can speak to when they read Tales from Mos Eisley, right? And then you go back and watch that big cantina scene, and it just means so much more. You can point to all those characters in the background and be like, I know what they're up to. I know what they're up to. That dude's an Anzadi. It makes the whole experience more alive. It's the same thing with the bounty hunters. It was the same thing with Jabba's palace, getting to know that sad story of why the fat guy was crying over the Rancor, by Kevin J. Anderson. It was bliss. So, now I have read this one before that we're reading now, because Marcel shared it with me. And I really enjoyed it. It really felt like such a fun little story that can make me appreciate, episode 1 even more. But when we get to Brennan's one, that's gonna be a first time for me. It's gonna be a first time for me. I'll read it in front of all of you. There's also one by Hand of Thrawn 45, which I may or may not do. But seeing as how I've read all of his other fan fictions, why not that one too? But yeah, on to part 2, the desert. Mos Espa was teeming with activity. Beings from all over the galaxy come together to eat, drink, trade, and most importantly, attend the Boonta Eve Classic. The crowds were overwhelming in both size and sound. Everywhere Ben turned, he caught glimpses of species he had never seen before, as well as plenty he had seen countless times in his travels. The fact that all these people had come to watch the race did nothing to help his anxiety. To his left, he saw a trio of jawas arguing with one another over what looked to be a piece of scrap metal that may have once been a pit droid. On his right, he saw several Nikto bodyguards leading a human sporting a ridiculous foppish hat to one of the local watering holes, and straight ahead he took in the seemingly endless procession of humanoids advancing toward the grand arena. Ben jostled his way through the crowd. When he left his pod racer behind, he had no idea where he intended to go. He just knew that he was beginning to feel claustrophobic in that hangar and needed out. The fact that he was outside and yet feeling even more claustrophobic did nothing to help the growing sense of panic he felt inside the pit of his stomach. He began to push more forcefully as he made his way through the streets. I need to get out of here, Ben thought to himself. He used his forearm to wipe sweat from his considerable brow. A momentary parting in the throngs of people revealed a break in the crowd. He dove for the opening and followed it, finally breaking free from the crowd. Beads of sweat continued to drip down, stinging his eyes with another sweep of his hands. He cleared his vision and kept trudging forward, away from the noise. The shops and storefronts quickly gave way to modest homesteads. Before long, Ben had found himself on the outskirts of Mos Espa. In front of him, the dune sea stretched across the landscape as far as the eye could see. Maybe I should just head out in the desert. Disappear forever. Who would even miss me? Should jump into the nearest starlight pit and be done with it. Ben continued walking for a short while. In front of him, he found a large rock and sat on it. Even though he had not ventured very far from the settlement, the sounds of the crowd had died down. Now that he finally had a moment to think in silence, he was frozen with indecision. Everything seemed so clear last night at the Poodoo Lounge. He would enter the Boonta Eve Classic, win it, and bask in the eternal glory and admiration of his peers. Quaternaros' thoughts turned to Ben Nelinth, a Tatooine-born pod racer, one of the greats, or so he was told. Local legend has it that Nelenf had lost his life attempting to scale the Benzin Plateau. As a tribute to him, the plateau was later renamed Ben's Mesa. sat right in the middle of the Boonta circuit. You arrogant fool, Ben cursed himself. This planet already has a hero named Ben, a local hero no less. What made you think it needed another? Ah, poodoo, Ben shouted in his frustration. He kicked down in front of him with one leg. The front of his left foot smacked against a jutting stone, immediately setting a shooting pain coursing through his body. He cried out in pain, began hopping, on his right foot as he tried to grab the other foot with both hands. The erratic movements resulted in unintended, that's a big word, Marcel, pure pirouette. I'm somebody smarter than me will know, which caused his entire body to twist. This momentum carried him over the jutting stone and flat onto his face. Wide-eyed with surprise, anger, and terror as he fell, he had failed to avoid getting sand directly into his eyes. He scrabbled forward and pushed off the hot desert floor with both hands. Ben clawed at his face in panic, trying desperately to brush the sand off with one hand and rub it out of his eyes with the other. At the same time, he started to spit even more sand out of his mouth. Still blinking rapidly, he tried and failed to get his bearings. He could barely see what was in front of him. Mos Espa, he recalled, was not far off. He had not ventured that deep into the desert. He had not really planned on staying out here, despite the negative self-talk. He merely wanted some time and space to think about things clearly, without any distractions. Yet somehow, he managed to make things even worse than before. The twin suns made the planet a near inhospitable environment for the desert-dwelling denizens of Tatooine. Visitors to Tatooine were often struck by just how hot it was out there. Yeah, was it 100? Was it more than 115 like it was in California for a while? It was not uncommon for the unforgiving Dune Sea to claim the lives of unprepared travelers and anyone foolish enough to venture into it without the proper clothing and equipment. As he recalled these well-known facts, Ben began to panic. He started forward with a hobbled and awkward gait. His left foot continued to throb with pain, but he ignored it. The one thing he knew for certain was that he could not afford to stay out there any longer than he already had. His eyes continued to burn from the sand. His vision was a perpetual blur. He felt around with his arms and eventually found purchase, wrapping them around a large stone. This is the rock I was sitting on. At least I think it was. So that must mean that Mos Espa straight ahead. I hope. Ben felt his way around the rock and began to walk forward very slowly. He could not risk another fall, and with his vision as impaired as it was, a fall was more than likely in his present condition. Somehow, he managed to get even more sand into his red-rimmed eyes when he first rubbed them with his hands. After a few minutes of stilted steps, Ben began to panic once more. I thought I was heading toward the sound of the crowd, but I still don't hear anything. Maybe I should head the opposite way. His limbs felt heavy as he turned and walked a few paces in the opposite direction. The feeling of disorientation started to increase with his rising panic levels. At the same time, the low wind began to pick up around him, which only made him feel even more disoriented and lost than he already was. Again, he tried picking his eyes by applying a careful and methodical approach to the task of clearing the grit from his eyelids. He was able to blink a little more clearly. When he looked up, he caught a glimpse of a gleaming argent streak out of the corner of one rimmed eye. I'm saved! That must be the way to Mos Espa. Ignoring the wind blowing in his ears and the perpetual feeling of grainy sand on his tongue, Ben pushed forward toward the gleaming building. His body strained to accommodate under the intense heat. No matter, he thought, if I don't keep moving forward, I will make it back. If anyone ever finds out, they might rename this part of the desert Ben's Folly. Oh, if I wasn't already going to die, I'd die twice over the shame alone. His thoughts started coming to him more slowly. It hurt to think. Every part of him felt sluggish. How much time had passed? He could no longer tell. The wind was picking up, drowning out all the sounds of pushing against him. As he approached the silvery gleam, he realized from the outline that it was not a building. It was a ship. Ben sank to his knees in dismay. His vision and disorientation had cleared just enough for him to register that this was not the way back to Mos Espa. What was a ship doing out here in the middle of nowhere? He had to wonder to himself whether he had stumbled across pirates. Law-abiding beings would use the spaceport. They would not land a ship on the outskirts of town. When he tried to get back up, he found he could not. He had very little energy left in him. The last of it seemed to drain away with his hope. He began to crawl forward towards the sleek-looking ship in the distance. Perhaps whoever was inside, if anyone was inside, would take pity on him. Even though he was wearing his special bantha hide pod racing gloves, He started to feel the heat build up in his hands as he slapped across the hot desert floor. One in front of the other, he kept going. The ship began to fade in and out of his vision. It almost felt as though all of this was happening to someone else. And then, without any warning, he stopped mid-crawl. As the howling wind began to die down, he stretched out his body one final time and let the darkness take him. Part 3. The Padawan. And I think, very clearly, we all know where this is going. Now, let me quickly adjust for this. Another happy landing. You're right about one thing, Master. Negotiations were short. Hello there. Ben opened his eyes, unsure how long he had been out. He saw a blurred figure in brown robes standing over him, blotting out the suns. The figure was holding something in his left hand. When it bent down, Ben saw that it was holding a canteen. You look like you could use some help, my friend. How did you find your way out here? The figure was unscrewing the cap on the canteen. Ben squinted and could barely make out a young human male. Had a neat haircut with a small braid hanging off his right side. As the man pressed the canteen to Ben's lips, he began to drink greedily. He noticed the man had blue eyes, with a hint of gray in them. They looked like kind eyes, not the eyes that would belong to a hardened pirate. Easy, friend, easy. You get sick if you drink it all at once. Small sips are best. Ben was conscious enough at this point to understand what the man was telling him to do. With a spluttering cough, he slowed down and began to take small sips. The man helped him to a sitting position. Can you stand? I'd like to take you back to the ship. Ben rubbed his closed eyelids once more and then pointed to his left foot, which sported an angry red welt. The throbbing had returned with renewed intensity. He shook his large head to indicate that standing on his own was very unlikely to happen any time in the foreseeable future. Of course, you've had quite the adventure. Let me help you. He screwed the cap back onto the canteen and reattached it to his belt. Crouching down again, he put his head under Ben's arm and hoisted him upward. Looking up for the first time, Ben noticed he had not been that far away from the ship when he fainted. Maybe 25 to 30 paces more, and he would have made it all on his own. As he reached the ship, another human stood at the entry ramp. Ben could see this man was older, wore a uniform of sorts, complete with a large burgundy officer's cap on his head. Is everything okay? The older man asked. I think so, Captain. I came outside to try and hail Qui-Gon, found our little friend here crawling toward the ship. He looks like he's had quite a rough go of it, the young man replied, sitting Ben down on the entry ramp. If I could trouble you further, Captain, can you have one of your men bring me a medkit? Do it. With a dour expression, the captain so named turned around and retreated into the ship. The young man and Ben were alone once again. He sat down on the ramp and passed the canteen back over to Ben. Do you have a name? The young man asked. Ben Quaderneros, Ben replied. Do you speak Huttese? Give me a moment. Up to this point, the young man had been speaking to him in Galactic Basic, with an accent that sounded like he came out of the core worlds. He pulled the datapad out of his Rhodes and punched in a few commands. This should help me with some of the more complex phrases and idioms. Ben Quaderneros peered up at him expectantly. My apologies. I'm still learning this language. My name is Obi-Wan Kenobi. Pleased to meet you, Ben. The young man extended his free hand. Ben looked at his own gloved hand and rubbed it against his forearm. Still hot from the desert. He quickly blew on it a couple times before enthusiastically shaking Kenobi's hand. The sudden movement brought back a momentary wave of dizziness. He saw black spots floating in the corner of his eyes. At this point, the captain returned with the medkit and handed it down to the young man who had introduced himself as Obi-Wan Kenobi. Thank you, Captain. It was not Ben Quaderneros. Thank you, Captain. I'll call if I need anything further. Snapping over the medkit, Obi-Wan turned back to his guest. What brings you out here, Ben? To Tatooine? The pod racing. Ben paused to take another swig of water from the canteen. He could feel the cold liquid coursing through his body. The restorative effects were immediate as his thoughts became clearer. To the desert? That's more complicated. Well, it looks as though we have a bit of time. I'd be interested to hear your story. Obi-Wan began to remove back the salves from the medkit and handed them to Ben. Bacta was a miracle substance, near universally used to treat wounds both minor and serious across the galaxy. Setting the canteen down beside him, Ben peeled off the protective casing on both salves and carefully applied each of them to his wounded foot. Within moments, the constant throbbing began to fade, and the sensation was replaced by a pleasant tingling. Thank the stars for Bacta, Ben thought to himself. He turned slightly to regard Obi-Wan. For such a young man, he had a serious demeanor about him. In spite of that, Ben caught a glimpse of impishness in the other man's gaze. This was a being who smiled with his eyes. There's no other way to describe it. He picked up his canteen and took another tentative sip, letting the cool liquid soothe his hot mouth. He cleared his throat and began to tell his story, or his tale. It all started with a bet. He explained to Obi-Wan what had happened at the Poodoo Lounge the night before. His arms flailed about as he attempted to set the stage for the younger man. That no-good bull's roar provoked him into biting off more than he could chew. And so he explained what started out as a simple trip to watch the Boonta Classic had turned to direct involvement in the race itself, with his own life on the line. He ended his story on a note of despair, casting his eyes downward. Obi-Wan could not help but feel compassion for this poor soul. Sounds to me like you found yourself in quite the Gundog's nest, Ben. What am I going to do? He started to blink back tears, but a few managed to escape. Obi-Wan tracked their descent across Ben's exceptionally elongated face. Well, I don't profess to know the answer to your dilemma. I have learned over the years that your focus determines your reality. Obi-Wan saw the look of confusion pass over Ben's face. He continued, your focus is what you believe and hear. Obi-Wan touched his head. And here. He finished placing his hand across his chest and tapping it twice. Ben absent-mindedly scratched his forehead. So you're saying that if I focus on failure, then I'm going to fail? Or at the very least, it's more likely to happen than if you decide to focus on positive outcomes. At least that's what Master Qui-Gon tells me. Master, are you a slave? What? Oh, no, stars, no. Not a slave. I'm a Padawan learner. A member of the Jedi Order. Qui-Gon Jinn is my Jedi Master. Jedi? Ben leaned closer and squinted at Obi-Wan with a healthy amount of skepticism. While not exclusively an excrement of the Jedi Order, the brown robes made more sense, now from an aesthetic point of view. What are you doing on this planet? We're nowhere near the Republic. That, too, is a long story. But to make a long story short, our ship is damaged and we're here to make repairs. Lost in thought, Ben took another swig from the canteen. It was nearly empty. He realized with some sadness. If you hadn't been here, I would have died out there. I could sense your distress in the ship, you know. Master Qui-Gon believes that things happen for a reason. And what do you believe, Mr. Kenobi? Please call me Obi-Wan. I believe that I'm not nearly as wise as my master. And therefore I am distinctly unqualified to give you any kind of expert opinion on metaphysics. But how are you feeling? In response, Ben extended his left leg and then stood up. Tentative at first. He was able to stand on his own 2 feet. He sat back down and drained the remainder of the canteen. Wiping his mouth, he replied, Much better. Thank you for saving me, but it's all for nothing. I can't show my face back in Mos Espa. I might as well hide out in the desert and become a hermit. Ben the Hermit. Again, Ben could see the laughter dance across his eyes. It wasn't a mocking laughter. Instead, one full of delight. I don't think that suits you, my friend. Can I ask you a question, Mr. Obi-Wan? Of course you may. For someone so young, how do you have so much confidence? I mean, I could see it, the way you speak, the way you carry yourself. Confidence? Obi-Wan laughed again and held up his data pad. Can I record you saying that? I would love to play it back a few times for some of my fellow Padawans on Coruscant. I constantly find myself struggling over whether I'm doing the right thing, whether I'm living up to the ideals of the Jedi Code, whether my master is pleased with my progress. But I have found that when we are caught between a rock and a hard place, sometimes the only way out is through. There it was again. The same advice he'd received from the spacer less than an hour before. Ben balled up his fist and responded with passion. Easier said than done. The only options for me end in failure, shame, and potentially death. Something tells me you won't die today. After the trouble I just went through to save you. Really? Can you see the future? I've heard from others that Jedi can see the future. Sometimes I wish that were true. But no, Ben, I can't see the future. I put my trust in the Force and call on it to guide my actions. Sometimes I get it right. Many times I don't. But I keep trying. Life can be a struggle. Sometimes all we can do, the only actions left to take, is to keep trying. Master Windu, another Jedi, once told the Padawans that you don't have to win. All you have to do is fight. How can I fight against such an overwhelming odds? I'm a coward. Look at me, hiding out in the desert before the race is set to begin. It appeared to me that you have far more courage than you think. You put yourself out there. It takes courage to do that. This galaxy is not particularly kind to those who decide to take a stand. It's far easier to tear something down from the sidelines. Much harder to stand up for what you believe in. But the jury Jews, Ben protested. Well, there are those who believe that alcohol consumption doesn't fundamentally change who someone is. It merely brings out certain aspects of their personality that were already there from the start. But from what you've told me, I don't think it was the jury juice. I don't think it was your pride either. I think it was all Ben. So you think I should race? I cannot answer that for you, my friend. Only Ben Quaderneros can answer that question. My point, however, is that you have everything you need already to make that decision for yourself. And whatever you decide, remember that it will not change the fact that you have intrinsic worth. You are part of the living force, and far from a coward. Ben thought for a long moment, taking in all that Obi-Wan had told him. The anxiety levels had considerably dropped over the course of their conversation. There was something about this enigmatic young Jedi. He had a calming, almost soothing effect about him. His serious demeanor was segmented by jovial outbursts, providing occasional glimpses of his youthfulness within him. Ben decided that he really liked this Jedi. He had come to a decision. A broad smile formed on his white face. He realized it was the first time he had smiled all day. You are very wise, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Your master should be proud of you. I have come to a decision. Ben stood up. Obi-Wan looked at his companion. What will you do? I will race. As if to underscore his determination, Ben pounded his fist into the palm of his other hand, and with any luck, win. Master Qui-Gon is fond of reminding me that there is no luck, only the Force. Trust in your instincts, my friend, and remember, what you choose to believe could play a significant role in how things unfold. Obi-Wan stood up and pocketed the datapad. He dusted off his robes and pointed off into the distance. If you keep walking in that direction, you'll find your way back to Mos Espa. But I would hurry if I were you. The chronometer on my datapad is correct. The race will begin very soon. How's your eyesight? I see clearer now than I have in a very long time. Thank you for your wisdom. When you travel the galaxy with Qui-Gon Jinn, you tend to pick up a thing or two. May the Force be with you. Ben Quaderneros nodded back at him. Wasting no further time, he cleared the entry wrap and began to make his way forward. At first, his steps were cautious. The back dive worked wonders on his foot. After a few moments, he started walking more quickly and confidently. He possessed a newfound determination born from decisiveness. This was a feeling he had rarely, if ever, experienced in his life. As Obi-Wan watched him go, he smiled to himself. Odd little fellow. Still, I think it will come out all right in the end. Picked up his empty canteen and walked back into the ship. Ben, Obi-Wan Kenobi said out loud, standing out in the hollow of the ship's entryway. Quite like that name. That was a lot. Part 4. Second chances. 1 second. I need some coffee. That was a lot of reading. Alrighty. Hours later, Ben Quaderneros found himself back in the Poodoo Lounge. The race was over. He had made it back in time to participate. From a certain point of view, the entire ordeal had been an unmitigated disaster. From another point of view, Ben had been very fortunate to come out of the experience relatively unscathed. In sum, all was well. That ended well. Things had ended well, despite all odds. Ben cast his mind back in the events of the afternoon, following his invigorating chat with the Jedi Padawan, Obi-Wan Kenobi. He'd walk back into that hangar with a renewed sense of purpose. Feelings of anxiety and despair still bubbled to the surface on occasion. He was only Tong, after all. He wasn't made of stone, but nothing would stop him. He was determined to race in the Boonta Classic. Bull's Roar be damned. Well, racing was not exactly what happened. Instead, his pod racer didn't even work properly. While the other contestants blasted off after the race initial countdown, he found himself stuck at the starting line. Dead on arrival, as some would say. An issue with his power couplings caused a complete system failure, which in turn resulted... I lost my train. I was in his engines flying off in several different directions. As Ben thought back on this particular humiliating moment, he consoled himself with the fact that he was still alive. Not every contestant could boast the same. Rats Terriel, another well-known contestant, had fatally crashed in the Laguna Caves. Now in the present, Ben was feeling quite philosophical about the whole experience. Sipping his ruby ale, he thought to himself that the fate suffered by Terriel could easily have happened to him. Maybe there was something to this force that everyone spoke about after all. The indignity he had suffered was outweighed by the aftermath. In the heat of the moment, Quadraneros had forgotten all about the little bet he had made with Bull's Roar. Once he had a chance to calm down, he remembered. Roar had bet him 5 million, that word that I can't pronounce, that he would not have the guts to enter the race. But he had entered. And even though he had not technically raced, the deal was a deal. If Roar had any notion of trying to weasel out of the deal, he would have to contend with the Hutts. And they did not take kindly to those who tried to forego their debts and obligations. Finishing his drink, Ben reflected on the fact that the present outcome was the best of both worlds. He had proven that he was no coward, and he had been spared from the race itself, which would have been a death trap for a novice like him. He was now ready to admit that he had a long way to go before trying to compete in a circuit like the Boonta Classic ever again. And to think, if it had not been for that Jedi Padawan, he would have walked away from all of this. Instead, he'd been given a second chance. Not only that, he'd also gained the resources to do something meaningful with that second chance. How many beings were fortunate enough to boast the same? Over the loudspeaker, the results from the race started to roll in. Against all odds, the little human child, Anakin Skywalker, came in first place. Zecto Gazgano had taken second place. In third came Aldar Beto. And the fourth place contestant, Ebe Endocott, was announced. Ben turned to Ebe, who'd been sitting with him the entire time. The Tong from Tund. Some were beginning to call him regarding Ebe with a large grin plastered on his face. He was feeling generous. Congratulations, Ebe. Can I buy you a ruby bleel? Quadraneros asked. Ebe shifted his gaze momentarily to the third companion, who was none other than Bull's Roar himself. He then looked back at Ben with a mischievous smile. Thanks, Quadraneros. So how much money did you win for Bull's Roar? Ben and Ebe shared a laugh at Roar's expense. In response, Roar let out a frustrated growl. Although neither of his companions could see it, his jaw was clenched tight, and he was grinding his teeth with frustration. Those who knew him well enough would later remark that Roar learned a valuable lesson in humility that day, and that he was better off because of it. While he would never openly admit it to anyone, Roar could not help but regard this silly little tongue sitting opposite of him with a grudging respect. As for Ben Quadraneros, he decided to continue along the path that started with the Bufra pod racing circuit. He was no longer concerned with winning, or even how others would perceive him. Instead, he would continue to put himself out there, ignore the ridicule that was sure to accompany his efforts. As he would eventually come to learn, much of that negativity came from beings who were far too afraid to ever step foot in a pod racer, let alone enter a high-stakes race. Obi-Wan Kenobi, a Jedi apprentice who was wise beyond his years, had taught him a lesson worth more than all that word in the galaxy. Only Ben could answer life's great questions for himself. Neither Jedi nor gimmick singer could tell him who he was or what to think. The answers he sought were within him the entire time. With that in mind, he made a promise to himself that he would ignore the naysayers and continue pursuing his dream. After all, racing was what truly mattered to him. Everything else was background noise. And Bantha Poodoo. The end. That was, of course, the once and frick, what happened? The once and future Ben, the tale of Ben Quadraneros. by the Revanchist 77, which we all know as the Revanchist on YouTube, and Marcel Ryan, which I think is a pretty great little story, if I do say so myself. Then, moving on to the next one, we have Stardust. Speaking of Bull Roar, by Quinlan Voss, YouTube. Of course, Brennan. I like this design for this thing. Summary. Nasty pod racer Bull's Roar contemplates a career change after an unlikely set of circumstances occurs during the annual Boonta. Sniffling the air with a mixture. And by the way, this is for me the first time. I have read the Ben tale before from Marcel. He shared it in with me before, but I have not read this yet. Or if Brennan shared it, I don't remember. So this is basically new for me. Sniffing the air with a mixture of disgust and anticipation, Bull's Roar stepped into the dimly lit cantina foyer, known as the Poodoo Lounge. The extremely cramped area smelled of a wide variety of alcohol and spices. His eyes blinked rapidly, trying to adapt to the dim lighting within the room, while his prodigious Sneevil snout worked overtime, deciphering which illicit substance he smelled. Roar searched the cantina for his target, sniffing heartily again and again until he found what he was searching for. Aha! Gritting a toothy smile to himself, Bull's Roar strode with confidence past the establishment's bar, where, as usual, individuals of a dozen different species shoveled alcohol into their oral cavities using an assortment of different appendages. Roar was a regular patron of the Poodoo Lounge, especially today. It was a tradition, after all these years, on the day before the big race, but he had some business to attend to first. Sneevils were single-minded people. Roar reflected as he was completely set on getting his task accomplished and off of his mental list. In the very back of the shady establishment were rows of booths cloaked in shadow. It was here that all individuals with less than moral intentions thrived. Here, in the back of the room, filled with the smoke of denizens of different substances that could even put a Wookiee in a coma, was the target of Roar's current objective. That objective was an individual crammed into a private booth, leaning his elbows on the crumbling table in front of him. Obscured by darkness, the robed individual ran his trunk around the edge of a glass filled with yellow liquid. As Roar neared the booth, the individual's eyes flicked up at him, and he nodded subtly to him. With a grunt, Roar slid in his ancient body into the booth, across the table from Elspad, a diminutive species with vaguely pachydermoid features. Pachydermoid features. Yeah, that's a word that I've never heard before. That's how stupid I am. The Elsipad spoke in a low, furtive voice with high timbre that reverberated out of his trunk, making Roar's large, furred ears twitch with discomfort. Alrighty. Hey there, old-timer. A pause as the weathered Elspad, glancing at Roar's face through wary eyes. You really gonna do this again, Roar? Roar sighed at the ignorant question, and then berated the Minuteman for the disrespect.
Listen to me here, Isik. We ain't friends. Don't you address me by the given name, alrighty? By me given name, alrighty? We're in a formal understanding of each other, okay? So Bull's due for the time being. Me won't respond to nothing else but my family name, see?
Isik interjected, twitching his trunk in apparent agitation. Okay, Mr. Bulls. In spite of the fact that we've known each other for 30-some years, we still ain't friends. What would you call us then? He sat forward, his trunk pushing his beverage to the side, a sign that this conversation was taking a serious turn. Roar noted that these actions, and additionally, you may note with his other senses, Roar could hear Arsik's accelerated heartbeat with his large ears, and Roar could smell the perspiration beating down the neck of the nervous Elsipad. Roar grinned.
We're associates, see? Yes, we do have to do this, alrighty? Now listen to ya. Listen to me here. I could dig my talents elsewhere. We'd be good for you to remember that.
Ersik's trunk drooped slightly, a sign Bulls knew, a resignation. Okay, Bulls, I hear you. You sang here at the pre-Boonta concert for what, 20 years, maybe more? Roar grunted in affirmative. And you've gone on to sell some truly incredible venues since you began singing here. Ursa continued. I get that you're a big deal, Bulls. You're an old timer. You have the respect now. You got fans any pod racer can only dream of. You've won the Boonta Eve Classic twice, right? But just because you're a big shot doesn't mean you can march in here and expect handouts from my establishment, okay? Roar saw Ursik's jaw clenched and his sharp tusks seemed to protrude from his face even more than normal. Roar had not been expecting this rebellious response. Roar took the staunch response as meaningless, at least compared to him. He shrugged.
Meh, then me guesses me glimmick act can be taken elsewhere, see? Listen to me here already. Me can take me act to some other pre-race concert. You can lose that business, Kay? Unless...
Roar trailed off and smiled, letting the unspoken request linger in the muggy air between them. Ursik snotted incredulously. Yes. Unless I get you some jars of giggle dust. Right? Every year it's the same request. He paused, shaking his head in disgust. If I give you any more of that stuff, your mind's gonna rot, Bulls. It's volatile. It is, and you know that giggle dust is illegal. That means it's expensive. I can't afford to give you half a dozen jars every Boonta Eve, okay? It's not worth it. Roar smiled, knowing he had won, and he leaned forward to add weight to his statement.
See? What you really can afford? Not having me to perform at the pre-Boonta concert. You lose more money than you would if you were to give me the giggle dust to hear.
Ursik grimaced, and the silence that stretched between them for several long moments was punctuated by the loud cantina music halting as the live band set for a new song. Then the music returned to play, causing Roar to grimace and raise a clawed finger to his sensitive ear. Ursik tugged at his trunk, apparently considering the options he had, but Roar knew he only had one. His glimmick music was renowned across the galaxy, and without him to be the face of the annual pre-Boonta concert at the Puda Lounge, Ursik would lose business on the most profitable night of his establishment's year. Ursik spoke in a weary tone. This is blackmail. But I hear you, Bulls. I may not like it, but you're right. I'll send the jars to Bratrin. Shrivel Bratrin was Roar's chief mechanic on his pod racer. Since as he'd gotten older, he cared less about maintaining his pod racer personally. Yet the Ursik's proposal, Roar's feature wrinkled up in disgust.
Don't send him to my Rax Lizard. Send it to me, Cortus. My Britain's a simple-minded fool that he is. Only thing his sorry species is good for you here. To be mechanics, ma. Britain is lucky to even have a job meetings.
Roar spat venomous words in reference to his chief mechanic. Ursik was grimacing during Roar's spiel, a hand nervously clutched to his trunk. Please, Bulls, come now. I can't have my patrons hearing slurs in here. The Poodle Lounge may not exactly be the most espacaf, but speciesism is extreme, even for you. Roar grinned at the discomfort of the old Elsipad and stood abruptly from the tail and laughed.
Me can say whatever I want here. You ought to know that.
Roar paused and yelled several more derogatory slurs similar to wax lizard into the establishment, then abruptly sauntered away from Ursik, through the cantina and out into the blinding sun, leaving stunned silence the cantina behind him, followed by a few angry cries from the offended aliens. Man, we got a rage bait YouTuber here. Roar grinned at the discomfort of the old Oh no, he already said that. Roar trundled through the burning hot glare of the sun that seemed to be reflected at him from multiple angles. As he moved through the crowd of dozens of different species, one man stuck out like a beached Beck Tory. He had a noticeably yellow stripe across his features, and his locked hairstyle made it apparent he was probably a near-human species. The man walked with the confidence Roar noticed, like he had a purpose to whatever it was he was doing. Roar liked that in a sentient. Purpose. So few of the miserable whelps this side of the Beetle Nebula had any kind of ambition, Roar thought. They just miled through life like a bunch of programmed droids, but Roar was not like that, like this sentient who pierced through the crowds with deliberate steps. He had chosen his destiny, risen above all others. His glimmick music would outlive him, reaching far wide to ears across the stars. And his legendary pod racing victories had cemented him as a legend of another scene. He could do what he liked. And he did. Roar was so consumed in his thoughts, he was no longer looking where he was going. And he was suddenly in the path of a giant Syrian oryx bird written by a grizzled leppy.
About to be crushed by the avian's talons, Roar couldn't help but flinch his face away in realization of his impending doom. In a mere blink, though, he moved aside by strong arms and sat down off to the side, just as the feet of the bird landed on the sandy ground he had been standing on moments prior. The savior was that man he had been observing moments prior, and now up close to him, based on the musky scent, Roar's nostrils pinpointed him as likely being a Kiffar. Did Brennan bring Quinlan Voss into a short story? Is that what Brennan did? I literally don't know yet. Knowing him, he would. The man offered a cautious smile. Next time, watch where you're going, friend. How dare this man address him as friend? Did he not know who the great Bull's Roar was? Methinks you unaware of who I am. To think any sentient in this here galaxy hasn't heard of me is astounding. Mah! You ought to be ashamed, Boonta hair. He used a Tatooine originated slur that referred to a Kiffar of the planet. The man had clearly heard the words before, as his eyes narrowed and his jaws set when hearing the nasty remarks, but Roar just glared up at him, daring him to make a move. His hand rested on a vibroblade decorated with lavish tenray, heart, crystal embellishments. But the man simply shook his head and walked away, slinking indistinguishably back into the crowd as if he were a street magician's trick. Bull's Roar turned away in disgust, determined to look for the careless Leppy that had nearly trampled him. Roar grinned to himself, imagining the look on the Leppy's face as he chewed him out. Stupid space rabbit! Oh my god! Stupid space rabbit. Do we got a Jackson type character in here? Let's go. Oh, hey. I watch your YouTube videos. How you doing? I don't want to lose my place, but it's on archiveofourown.org. Tales from Boonta Eve. I'll leave a link. I can just do this. Do bloop. Bloop. It's going to be in the comments. There you go. It should be there. You can find it there. Anyway, what was I? Bull's Roar sat in the mechanic's bay, watching his mechanical shrivel Bratron tinkering with the Hydra spanner on the right quadret 4-barrel 904E engine. He had been tuning, checking, and testing the pod racer for hours now, making sure all the specifications were optimal for tomorrow's big day. The wax lizard was perspiring from his leathery skin in the heat, but Roar no such worries under shade. Sipping a Jogan-infused Corellian twister, Roar savored the bluish liquid, sending it frothing back and forth with appreciative turning motions. Reaching to a pouch on his belt, Roar grabbed one of his precious jars, allowing the glass to glint in the sun that reached portions of the mechanic's bay. He savored the beautiful lavish look of the golden powder that sat in the jar. Cracking open the lid and pinching a portion of it, he lifted to his nostrils and inhaled. Instant euphoria came crashing down on him as his senses skyrocketed to insane heights. He had taken enough of the substance to be hysterically high for the next half hour or so. Roar had fallen to the routine of taking a bit of jiggle dust every time he watched his wax lizard work on his pod racer. It made everything so amusing when inevitably the clumsy Morgulak would hit his ridged head or stub his toes, and Roar did not have to wait long. As soon as the Hydra spanner had dealt shriveled a blow to his shoulder, eliciting hoots and hollers and laughter from Roar. By the way, when he takes his little when he does his little thing there, as I just said, I imagined if anybody's seen Breaking Bad, Tuco Salamanca. And so Roar goes and does it, and he's like, tight, 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 tight. That's what that's what Tuco does. Damn, Bull's Roar is such a racist. Bull's Roar hated humans. Humans were the worst. They were ugly, for starters, but they also had egos. Most species seem to like humans or respect them in the galaxy, but not Bull's Roar. Humans could all float in vacuum of space for all he cared. Stupid patches of fur on their hair made them appear like Coffrigan monkeys. They're probably just as stupid, Bull's thought. His thoughts were interrupted by the voice of a human he'd been talking to. Babu was just as ugly as any other human, but what made him especially ugly was a giant tattoo adorning his face. Stupid human putting ink in their weak flesh. Bull's Roar had said it once in an interview, and he thought it often. The day a human won a pod race was the day he would stop racing permanently. This would never happen. So few human racers. Young Skywalker was supposedly a racer,
and Roar caught a glimpse of Zelbreeze, a newer mysterious racer, looked to have been yet another stinking human. Babu was talking to him, and Bull's Roar zoned back in. I mean, I get why you're mad. Anyone would be frustrated to be mocked by Sebulba on live Hollow show. Roar interjected.
Me ain't mad. Why would me be? He's jealous of me. Me's a celebrity now around the galaxy for singing and racing, you hear? Mother Duck can step in poodoo. What does he know?
Babu twitched in what Roar amused his nervousness, as he should be. He was a nobody, extra hand at the cantina. Bull's Roar was the most famous Neville in the entire galaxy. Of course he would be nervous in his presence. He was no star. Though Roar did consent that the interaction on live Hollow with Sebulba from earlier had rattled him. The Doug liked to hurl insults, but Roar determined to show him at the race the following day. At least Roar promoted his appearance singing that night at the lounge. In all things, a positive could be found. Stupid human weaklings are still talking, though. Well, I mean, if you still feel it, you can sing, despite what happened today. I mean, you have 5 till showdown. I can tell Master Ursic if you don't feel up to it, though.
Nonsense. What is this about me not doing me routine, you hear? Not nothing. Between this one ears, me thinks.
Roar pointed a talon at the man's tattooed head and chuckled. Several minutes later, and Bull's Roar was behind the curtain, ready for his annual Poodoo Lounge pre-race performance. Roar was not nervous, as he had sold out extra arenas 16 times the size of the city cantina, but this was tradition. His home venue, and all stars at home venues, Roar had taken a pitch of jiggle dust backstage that always kept his mood light. Whenever he was on it, it changed his accent too. He stopped speaking his Sneevil and fluent speech. The jiggle dust always had him speaking in more coherent human-like terminology and grammar. An unfortunate side effect to his usage of giggle dust, as Roar hated sounding human. The two-headed race announcer announced him, and the crowd went wild. They were here to see him. They were here to worship him. He was the star, and these were his adoring children. Babes Roar strutted on stage. Babes Roar? Did I just say Babes Roar? Bull's Roar strutted on the stage, flashing a toothy grin across the room. No doubt somewhere there was someone taking a video for a live Hollow feed, and he intended to dazzle with his show. They began to chant for him, all chanting his family name, eliciting a toothy smile from Roar. Bull's Roar put on his most grandiose speaking voice and bellowed, "That's my name, beauties!" Roar knew that the entire crowd was watching live in the lounge or elsewhere in Tatooine would be clinging to his every word. The anticipation for the Boonta Eve Classic was unparalleled in the galaxy, and everyone would be thirsting for any statement from the pod racers. In that moment, Bull's Roar's very words were each worth more than the most finely refined iridium bars. This was, by definition, a captive audience, and Bull's Roar decided he would ruffle some feathers, throw some subliminal insults to Sebulba. Wherever the cursed Doug was, it was time to use his stage and his stardom to get back at Sebulba for the humiliation suffered earlier at the interview. As you all know, I'm racing in tomorrow's Boonta, Roar began, hearing the crowd get excited at the very mention of the race. My first number is about courage, not dedicated to all the spineless rejects who just watched the Boonta. Roar paused, about to infer that a spineless reject was another name for any member of the Doug species, and a green tongue dared to interrupt him from his seat near the stage. Roar couldn't believe his ears, as this nothing wormo proceeded to address him with a laugh. What a comedian! Roar wondered if the foolish tongue was perhaps drunk. How dare he take the spotlight away from the star of the night? How dare he talk to Bull's Roar during his number? Sebulba's transgressions of the day immediately evaporated from Roar's mind as he set his sights on a new worthless target. Bull's Roar desired then to make a mockery of the stupid alien, whirling on him as he spat down words from the pedestal of his stage. Oh, a comedian, am I? You wish I were joking, you big-headed tong. Roar grinned, picturing the Poodoo Lounge Elsa Pad owner. Ursic's sigh of frustration at Roar's usage of a tongue insult. He was somewhere in the dimly lit back of the lounge, probably plugging his oversized ears. Meanwhile, the tongue was spluttering. I didn't mean any offense. Bull's Roar twisted his grip on his instrument, feeling frustration well up within his chest. Clearly, the green skin had not yet been made aware of what Bull's Roar was. Roar decided to take a tongue degrading route in his reply. Of course not. All tongs are too cowardly for pod racing. And it was true. Tongs are well known as some of the most spineless and fearful species in the galaxy. But to Roar's surprise, the tong took a feisty approach, and instead of backing down, fired back a retort. That's not true. I've raced the Boo for circuit. Bull's Roar nearly laughed aloud then and there. since that was the circuit known for using safety measures in its races. Few pod racers believed it to be a legitimate series of tracks. The poofra? That's for inexperienced amateurs. Bullsroar spat, seeing a few others in the audience snickering at his remark. This encouraged him to throw in another tongue slur as he added in his remarks. I bet 5 million, that word again, you wouldn't dare enter the Boonta hayseed. The slur seemed to have had his desired effect, as the tongue leapt angrily from his seat, declaring, I'm no hayseed. I'm Ben Quaderneros, and I'll take that bet. Roar grinned a toothy smile to himself. Perhaps this tongue was not as cowardly as the rest of his miserable species. This one had a little bit of fire to him. Roar whirled back to face the diminutive Ben Quaderneros, patting his head in a condescending manner. His sensitive sense of smell picked up a nasty tongue cologne. Brave you may be, amateur, but if you want to enjoy your winnings, you have to survive the race. Roar began laughing as he declared to his gathered audience, I'm rededicating this song. My first number here tonight, too. He paused for an instant, searching for the name the tongue had just introduced himself. Ben Quaderneros. He launched into Combustible, one of his most popular songs, which told the story of a pod racing crash. Bullsroar plucked at his glimmick staff, enjoying the feeling against his furry hands. He had first performed the song many years ago, at the sold-out Color Rack Amphitheater on Coruscant. Roar resolved to make this the best show he'd ever performed after all. He had to please the adoring throngs of fans who cheered his name. Oh man, we're almost done. That's crazy. The whir of his pod racer engines always felt both painful and wonderful in Bullsroar's sensitive ears. He was entering into the final stretch of the race. Seeing the finishing line looming out far in front of him, the race had gone fine, Roar supposed. There had been crashes and deaths already, gruesome sights of mangled bodies, exploding in collision. But despite not exploding in an inferno, Roar was not making much progress. He just was not on his game today. Maybe the giggle dust was slowing his senses a bit, as he had taken a pinch, of course. Just a pinch. Whooshing across the line to cheers from fans, Roar's eyes looked up at the scoreboard as he hopped out of his vehicle amidst the chaos of the milling sentience on the race floor. There was his mechanic waddling up toward him through the electric crowd. Bertrand spoke quietly. How'd it go out there, Mr. Bowles? It's all a race. No risks. No mistakes. You placed 6th. Roar rarely rubbed his temples. Well, 6th was a good replacement. Or a good placement. It was most certainly not a win. And who won today? Nah, that's a boba, I hope. Bertrand's leathery face grinned. You didn't see? The dog crashed. There came a grating sound from the cullis, which Roar realized was him laughing. Roar forgot himself for a minute, enjoying the laughing chorus of the inferior wax lizard. So, who won, Bertrand? Methinks it must have been Gascana. Roar inquired. Bertrand shook his head. Somehow, young Skywalker won. Roar's eyes popped out of his head. The human? How? Then words of old came rushing back to Bullsroar. The interview on Malastare a year prior. The day a human wins a pod race is the day I stop racing. Call Bullsroar what you wanted, but he most certainly not a liar. Snivel did not go back on his word. Besides, 6th place was an admirable place to finish, and he was still alive. Bullsroar did not need a pod race after all. He also had glimmick music, and his adoring fans around the galaxy would continue to love him for that. Roar glowered at Bertrand, realizing what he had to do then. Bertrand, Roar grunted, how would you like to take me pod racer, methinks? He hated the idea of the wax lizard racing with his beautiful machine, but Roar figured if a human could race, perhaps a wax lizard could too. Bertrand was completely shocked, his mouth hanging open. What's this? Let me race your pod racer? Are you high on stardust? Roar grinned a smile tugging across his face, revealing sharp canines. Yeah? I think that's what you say. Nah, maybe I am. And that's the end of that story. I really enjoyed that. There's another fantastic one. And I'm not just saying that because Brendan and Marcel are my friends. They're really fun little stories. There is one more, which is by Hand of Thrawn 45. I don't know if I'm going to actually play that one. We'll see, actually. Let's see. We should have one. Just by Quinlan Voss. Hand of Thrawn 45. And lastly for today, loser takes all. Dudbolt's tale. Hand of Thrawn 45. Dudbolt is sick of being Sebulba's lackey and decides to place a wager that'll make him the Boonta Eve Classic's real winner. The races reflects in heat haze, suspended between white sand and blue sky. From a distance they looked motionless, but each was careening across the desert at 700 kilometers per hour, chasing death or glory. Sun was bright on his head, wind harsh in his face, but Dudbolt squinted through the lenses of his goggles and twisted his control yoke to weave around the stone pillars of the Mushroom Mesa. The mob of racers had just burst free from Mos Espa's arena and were still bunched together, but Sebulba was already in the lead, would only gain distance on his opponent in the coming 3 laps. I was fine with Dudbolt. He was neither ambitious nor crazy enough to go gunning for the Dug. He had his own ticket to, well, not glory exactly, but money, which was almost as good. If this race went to plan, he would come out a winner, no matter where he placed. As he concentrated on his dodges and weaves, the flare and streak of the other racers, Deadbolt tapped his control panel and turned on the radio broadcast coming from the arena. The cloying, too familiar voices of Foyd and Bed sounded in his ear above the rush of wind and the roar of his engines. He couldn't afford to take his eyes off the path, but the Troig's narration would fill him on the highlights of the race and just might tell him what he needed to ensure he ended up a winner. But the first words he heard were the last he wanted to hear, in a tone both fond and condescending. Fod declared, "Wait, little Skywalker's stalled." Deadbolt wanted to ram someone. This was just his luck. He started off on the arena grid, right next to the little human and his little pod racer. He'd given the thing a superstitious check-over. He'd been sure that scrapping machine was in good condition, but no. He hadn't even gotten past the starting line. Fod added that Ben Quaderneros was having trouble too. What did Deadbolt care about that? This race, damn it, was all about Skywalker, and Skywalker couldn't even get out the gate. Times like this, Deadbolt was convinced he really, truly was born to lose. "Hey, Crudbolt," came the cry from Constantina. "Think you get in the top 5 this time?" Tone dripped with cheery, mocking disdain. Deadbolt took a deep breath and a deeper swirl of his Beldron whiskey, then pivoted his bar stool to face his accusers. There were 2 of them, a Rhodian and a Nosurian, half spilled out of their chairs at a nearby table. The Rhodian's snout twisted as he pressed. "Come on, Crud." That's my dog, if you can hear that. Come on, Crud. We're just asking. I mean, man, he won't stop. My goodness. Come on. Alrighty. We're just asking. I mean, you'll at least get into the top 10, right? First, I'm a Deadbolt dud. He curled his lips to bare his jutting tusks. And second, I'm racing to win. Really? We were just watching some of your last races and, we couldn't be sure. Why would anyone enter into this race if they weren't gunning for first place, huh? Dead planting hands on his thick midsection. Unfortunately, almost tipped off his bar stool. "Oh, come off it, Crud. We all know Sebulba's gonna come in first. Real gambles on who'll come in second. I'm going for Monic myself. I'm putting down on Mars Ghoul. No, sorry, Crud, but the odds on you getting second seeds aren't so good. Maybe try harder. The bet makers will be nicer for you next year." Nozarian chuckled too. Deadbolt didn't have to put up with this. He gulped down the last of his Beldron now and hopped off the bar stool, which was annoyingly high for his squat Volpterian frame. As he stumbled out of the cantina, they called behind him. "Hey, we were only joking, Crud. I mean, Dud, can I have an autograph? Might be worth something someday." The worst part was that they weren't even wrong. Dud wasn't playing to win, he never did. No, he kept to himself in the middle of the pack. He blocked, rammed, or knocked out the racers he was told to knock out. In the process, he put in Volpterine 357 race to its share of scrapes and modest crashes, but he kept on racing, kept on fixing matches on the orders of his employer. That was how he made his real cash, since he really got much prize money from his middling finishes. As Dole stepped into the Mos Espa streets, he discovered it was midday. There's no shadows to hide it in. The suns were brutal. With a sigh, he made his way through the light-battered streets toward the arena. With 2 days left until Boonta Eve, this part of town was getting thick with tourists. Not to mention mechanics, hawkers, gamblers, hut thugs, and everyone else that was part of the pod racing ecosystem. They were the kind of people who knew Deadbolt by sight. And some of them waved or pointed, but nobody mobbed him or stopped him for an autograph because, as his hecklers at the bar had said, it might be worth something someday. But not now. The guards let him inside the hangar without a fuss. Grateful to be in the shade again, Deadbolt sought out his employer. Sebulba wasn't hard to find. The Dug never was. Even when he left his giant split X pod racer behind and stalked Mozespa. He always had a crowd of fawning fans and bootlickers trying to lap up a little of his glory. Inside the hangar, it was different. Only pod racers and the personal staff were allowed inside. Yet even here, Sebulba was being attended to by his luscious blue slaves, Anne and Tanagela. They were in the middle of giving him a foot massage, well, technically hand massage, when Dudbolt approached. The dog bore teeth in a nasty grin and said, "Oh, loco, shut up. I was wondering if you're still up for it." "You know I am," said Bulba. "Good, I was getting worried about to win the race without your help." He snickered and told his Twi'leks to be gone. They bowed and scampered off somewhere behind the split X bulks. Sebulba popped out of his chair and onto his hands. "What do you want from me this time?" asked Dudbolt. He glanced from the hangar at this hour. They were the only pilots around. "Oh, just the usual. 2,000 credits for each racer you take out." "Do I have to make them crash?" "Crash? Or if you can prove you slowed them down, I'll give you 1,000. So Bubba scratched his muzzle to toe. "We can get started early. Tomorrow, once he brings it in, I'm going to give Moscow Speeder a little improvement. Mars being around it close, so I need you to distract him." "I can do that. How much? 1,000?
Or distracting him? I'm doing the real work. Say 500, 800, 600. That's my final offer. I can distract him with Gallus too, you know. I'm just trying to do you a favor, Dud."
"Fine." Deadbolt growled. "At least you got the name right. 600, but for each one I knock out."
2,000. We agreed. Trust me, Dud. I never go back on my word.
He did all the time, but again, Deadbolt wasn't the place to argue.
"No problem, Sebulba. You can count on me." "I know I can. We got a great partnership, you and me."
Some partnership, Deadbolt thought. Sebulba got the glory, the respect, the fawning fans, and bootlickers. What did Dud get? Scraps thrown under the table. Enough to live on, but they weren't what he'd taken up racing for. He'd been the best pod racer in all the Volpter, but when he'd gone into the larger galaxy, he discovered he was just one pilot among thousands. He'd never be matched for the likes of Sebulba. Once, just once, Deadbolt wanted to be a winner, but he couldn't think of how. "And there goes Skywalker. He'll be hard pressed to catch up with the leaders." With those words in his ear, Deadbolt's spirit lifted. The little human's little racer was supposed to be fast, and maybe, just maybe, he was able to sprint past all the bigger machines to get close to Sebulba, but not too close. Up ahead, Deadbolt saw the Doug's massive split X pylons slam against a racer that had dared creep alongside. From its flash of green, he recognized the unlucky machines as Mahonics, and it didn't have the mass to push back against Sebulba. Instead, the Grand's racer was knocked repeatedly into one of the Mesa's towering stone pillars. The left engine exploded and the right one went spinning, the pilot's pod flailing madly behind it. Deadbolt swung his racer wide. The last thing he wanted was to suck in debris and blow himself up. In a split second, he was past Monarch's wreck and speeding toward Beggar's Canyon. He heard the whine of a racer coming fast behind him, then saw the flare of two small engines passing him by. Deadbolt's spirit soared. It was a little Skywalker, already caught up with the main pack, after less than half a lap. If he could keep it up, if he could avoid getting wrecked like poor Monarch, if Deadbolt did his part, it might truly be a glorious race. Deadbolt knew what he had to do next. Skywalker passed him, just before the track narrowed, and the pod racers were funneled to the wind of Beggar's Canyon. Deadbolt fired his rockets and jumped ahead of Odie Mandrel, and settled right behind Skywalker as they plunged into the rocky narrows. Deadbolt didn't have the biggest racer either, but he knew how to use it. He swung his machine left and right, hogging the entire track to prevent anyone from creeping past. All the while he followed Skywalker's blaze. He had no intention of overtaking the little human. No, he was exactly where he wanted to be. For now, anyway. It was the day before Boonta Eve in Mos Espa, thronged with excitement. Even Deadbolt got caught up in it as he wandered the crowd around the arena. Some people called him out and acted happy to see him. He even ran into a clutch of Volptarian tourists, 2 parents and 3 pups, who asked for his autograph. It left him with a high, but that lasted only until he reached Garduila's casino, saw the odds people were laying down. Sebulba commanded a 3-to-1 ratio in his favor for the first place. Mars Gal was the most favored by him, followed by Monarch, Gasgano, Tempto, Pugalize. Deadbolt had to scan halfway down the list to see himself a mediocre racer in the middle of the pack. It got even worse when he scanned the overhead screen listing odds for slots 2 through 5. Mars was the favorite for the number 2 seed, of course, but also for number 3. For some reason, Gasgano had 5 to 2 odds in his favor to take the 4th spot. Again, Deadbolt was forgotten in the middle of the pack. Nobody expected him to win. Nobody even thought he'd make the top 5. Angrily, he shoved his way to the front of the betting queue. Some people called at his back angrily, but the long-haired human at the front of the line stepped obligingly out of the way. Deadbolt asked the snailing-shaped Vipit clerk behind the grate how many people had put down money for Deadbolt in the top 5. The Vipit didn't seem to recognize Deadbolt. His eyes extended as he peered through his screens, and he finally said, "He had 6 bets in favor of that racer. Would you like to place one? Odds are currently 7-1 against, so should he win? You'd get excellent returns." That's my dog, if you can hear that again. Deadbolt growled and looked at the overhead screen because he won't stop crying or whatever the hell he's doing. Nobody's watching anyway, so. Deadbolt growled and looked at the overhead screen. He wanted to put down money for himself. He wanted to show up all the naysayers and score cash of his own so he wouldn't have to feed Invincible's table scraps. Well, I would love to finish this, but they're keeping going, so there's a little bit left. I read a good portion of it, but it's another good one. You can read it, of course, at Archive of Our Own. But yeah, so that was basically it. I'll be back online later for talking about some more Marvel comics, but for now, I'm going to head out. But if you want to finish that story that I was reading, go to that website. Anyway, thanks for checking it out with me, and have a good one, everyone.